It's very easy for us as human beings to miss a gift that is real, but we cannot see. It could be said that something like love falls into this category. You cannot, strictly speaking, see it, and yet everyone knows it's real. It is often known by its effects. Spending time together, doing good deeds for a person, or a married couple having a child, which goes far beyond the physical act. It seems to be much easier for us to at least acknowledge, if not appreciate, a gift we can see. The readings of the day deal with both realities. First reading gives us a small window into the Levitical laws that deal with leprosy, and admittedly, they do seem very harsh. If you're listening to the podcast, Father Mike Schmidt, then you get little snippets, he's very good. So if you're not listening to it, I recommend you do. It's free. You've got to have a phone, I guess, or a computer, for the podcast. But it's well worth listening to it because he's giving little insights into why they made sense. They may seem archaic to us or even counterintuitive or contrary, just like weird, outdated. But they made sense for the people. I recommend people really get into, Father Mike Schmidt's podcast right now because he's going through Leviticus. But they seem to us harsh. Well, this cannot be a full explanation of the laws, but one of the things that these laws were meant to do was show the Israelites that the deadly disease of leprosy was an image of something that they could not see and was even far more deadly than the physical the disease they could see, and that was sin. So it was meant to be an image, to serve as an image. Not that God used it, but he wanted to teach them, see that what you can see that is so awful and is a deadly disease is in a way nothing compared to the truly deadly disease of sin. What leprosy did to the body, sin does to the soul. It deforms it, it weakens it, it isolates it, damages it, and so on. It was acknowledged in the Old Testament that only God could cure leprosy. So, for example, in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 7, Naaman, this general of the Syrian king, hears about somebody in Israel who can cure leprosy. So he goes and he brings a letter from his master to the king of Israel. King of Israel reads the letter and he rent his clothes. He says, Am I God? Am I God to kill and to make alive? That this man sends me, in other words, his boss sends word to me to cure a man of leprosy? I can't do that. Only God can cure leprosy. And then he goes on, only consider to see how he is seeking to pick a quarrel with me, because he's asking me to do something that no human being can do, to cure leprosy. Well, then Elisha says, send him to me, I'll take care of it. But Elisha knows full well that he can only do something because God permits him to do something. And Elisha doesn't do anything directly except go wash in the waters. And long story short, he realizes it's not the waters per se, but the act of obedience to the Lord. The waters are simply an instrument and a foreshadow of the waters of baptism. This is a necessary background to the gospel of this Sunday. When this leper approaches Jesus, which he was forbidden to do, they could be stoned to death for doing this. There's a great scene in The Chosen where the leper approaches Jesus, and Peter basically, I can't remember if he has a knife in his hand. I think he does. It's like, get away or I'll kill you. He's with Jesus, and I'll kill you. You can see it in his eyes. But they were terrified of the leper. Terrified. Not the person, but the disease. It was so awful. God was saying, I wish you were that terrified of sin. Not terrified in the more for love rather than simply a fear of punishment. I don't mean terrified in the sense of a fear of punishment, but terrified in the sense of avoiding it because you love me more than you're attracted to the sin, or you simply do nothing to give way to the impulse of the sin. I wish you loved me more. That's what God is trying to teach them, and he's still trying to teach us. We fear much more what we can see versus what we cannot see, but which is just as real, if not more real, and its consequences are far more reaching than physical death. And that is, it could be eternal separation from God. This man in his approach to Jesus shows two key things for effective prayer. Number one, he has confidence that Jesus has the ability to heal him. The fact that he risks, and he knows he's risking because the lepers knew the code. They knew the rules. They had to carry a bell around so people would know there was a leper, and they had to shout, like the reading says, it says they had to go like this, like when we go like this, because we want everybody to hear. They had to go like this so the sound would go out. Leper, leper, unclean, unclean. Talk about humiliating. But that's what they had to do. So they all know the rules. But he has humility. So he knows that Jesus can cure him. He has this confidence that's almost brazen because he's violating all the social norms. And he has humility at the same time because he does not demand of Jesus to cure him. If you will, you can cure me. He requests the healing, doesn't demand it. In other words, he acknowledges that he has no strict rights to it. Jesus does something even before healing him that he did not need to do. He touched him, and in doing so shows all of us that he does not become unclean by coming into contact with us, with this leper or with us, but rather we become clean when we come into contact with him. We are the ones who are cleansed. Jesus is not made unclean, as I would become unclean if I touched a leper in the days of Jesus. This man is instantly healed, and Jesus, then we know what he does. He instructs him not to tell anyone about it, but go and show yourself to the priest so that he might be declared healed publicly and then reinserted back into the worshiping community. The man completely ignores Jesus and goes and tells everyone what has happened to him. He basically tells the story of his encounter with Jesus. Because it's not just I got cured, but Jesus cured me. Jesus made me better. Jesus changed my life. Jesus, he got rid of my leprosy. You could just hear this man go on and on. Like Jesus basically gave me back my life. Guess what this is called? It's evangelization. It's, people, you ask the average Catholic, can you describe for me evangelization? They go, huh? And I don't mean that in a sarcastic sense, but it's, to make it dramatic a bit. Most people wouldn't know what the word evangelization means. I don't know what that means, because we don't think about it. But telling a story, yeah, most of us, we know what telling a story is. Evangelization is really, when you break it down into its itty-bitty parts, it's telling a story. It's telling the story, the key story. And it's not just the story of the catechism, although that plays its role, it's essential, but it's telling the story of what Jesus has done for me. Evangelization is just a word describing the good news of Jesus Christ. And if any baptized Catholic does not know what Jesus has done for them, then you need to think about your baptism. You need to think about your baptism. Every baptized Catholic who has then made their first confession and has made many more after that, which all of us need to do, even if you've never committed a mortal sin, and very few of us haven't. So says the church, so says the saints, right? It's hard for the average person to not commit one or many mortal sins in their lifetime because of the weakness of human nature. And because, I'll just leave it at that, the weakness of human nature. Let's say the person never committed a mortal sin, though. All the times we went to confession to strengthen ourselves in grace, and if you don't have a story to tell about what Jesus did for my life, like you're not connecting the dots. Maybe because somebody's never taught you. I'm teaching you now. Connect the dots. That's the story. What Jesus has done for me every time I've received the Holy Eucharist. If he didn't do that, I'd be spiritually starved to death. I'd be lost. What Jesus had done for me when I got married, in the church to my spouse. On and on and on and on. Do we attribute it to ourselves, our own resilience, or do we attribute it to what Jesus has done for me? Certainly baptism is absolutely what Jesus has done for me, but I may be very successful in my life, and I perhaps attribute that to my own talents and my own gifts. Where did they come from? Strip it down to the bare wall, to the bare bones. Jesus has given this to me. He's done this for me. He's given me all of this. And it could be very little in one's life, but that could be everything for that person. We all have our story to tell. That's evangelization. Evangelization is just telling the good news about Jesus Christ. That's what this man does. It's not as complicated as we sometimes think or make it out to be. This man has received a tremendous gift. In his case, it's dramatic. His healing from a deadly disease. His leprosy is completely healed. And more important is his isolation from the believing community. He's able to be reinserted back into the worshiping community. He can go into the temple. He is filled with joy and cannot help but tell everyone who will listen to him. Grace received is now grace given, as I mentioned many weeks ago. Jesus Christ has made each one of us who is baptized clean. Jesus, with his Father and the Holy Spirit, cleansed us of original sin and brought us into relationship with himself, and also made us a member of his believing community, the church. So we already have a story to tell if we're baptized, if we really think about what is done for us. Jesus continues to offer us his healing grace, but is given in such a way that we do not see it like leprosy. And yet it is real, far more real than if he was to take away paralysis. Sin separates us from God. If it's mortal sin, then it can separate us from him for all eternity. What is more serious, paralysis or eternal separation from God? Our human tendency, of course, let's admit it, is to say paralysis is worse. We can't see the sin, right? The mortal sin, perhaps, we can't see it. So if Jesus offered us an opportunity, remember the guy who's lowered down from the roof. And Jesus shows us the priority we should ask for, but our tendency would say, give me back my legs. Jesus says, well, I want to give you back your soul. But to prove to you the Son of Man can do what you can't see, I'll do what you can see. And he says, get up and walk. But he forgives the man's sins first. And he's teaching us. This is hard for us, because I don't know what I would do. I like to think I would say, Lord, take away my mortal sin. Take away my grievous sins. Set me on the path to grace so that I can meet you when I die, rather than cure my physical disease. I hope I could say that. But that's where that's where we want to be. That's where Jesus wants us to be. And then to be able to tell the story about how important that is. What should our response to this be? We need to look no further than today's leper. Grace received is grace given. When we are healed, it is not that we run about telling everybody, hey, I went to confession, because they'll think, boo, coo, coo. They'll think we're nuts, probably. Well, that's not the point here. It's about we should be disposed and ready to share with people what Jesus' saving and restoring power has done for us. And it's an ongoing thing. It's not just a one-time event. Otherwise, we just keep the grace for ourselves, and you know what that disposes us to become. If you remember what I said a couple of weeks ago, la pew, right? A swamp. We become a swamp. Why? Because it goes nowhere. It goes nowhere. We want to grace received, grace is given. We want to keep it going. Or they say today, pay it forward. We want to give it away, in a sense, tell the story. And we're replenished when we do this, because we're not bragging. We shouldn't ever want to be bragging about it. We want to tell the story. We're excited about it. Today, each of us needs to ask ourselves the question, do I feel impelled to tell the story and evangelize? to share the good news of Jesus Christ with others around me. And it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be preachy to do this. So don't think I'm saying you'd have to stand up with your Bible, maybe that'll come into play. I don't know. Maybe at some point it will, so it's good to be prepared to form yourself, with Scripture. It should be part of our spiritual food anyways. So you don't have to be necessarily preachy, but just be willing to tell the story. Because that's initially the hook that attracts the fish. That's the hook that attracts the person when they see what Jesus has done for us. And if they see it happening on a regular basis, it's compelling. It's attractive. I've had people take RCIA. Why do you want to take RCIA? Because I saw the way this person was living. Ooh. Excellent. Excellent. That's the way it should be. So it's just being willing to tell the story of the good things that God has done for you, and maybe that means how God has strengthened you through a time of great suffering and pain. This really, people are looking around, and they're suffering. We all suffer. And if we as Christians, Catholics, are just trying, to be faithful to the Lord and asking Him to help us, and that's having a positive effect in our life, even if it's one day at a time, people are looking. Don't kid yourself. I tell people sometimes a story, kind of a different vein. When I told the guys I played basketball with I wanted to be a priest, they never let me go. I was under this freaking microscope all the time. And I didn't tell them to brag about it. They just, I don't know, I can't remember the specific circumstances, but it just came out. I don't know if I was too excited. I was too dumb to tell them, and then they never let me. They always, I thought you're supposed to want to be a priest, Hamilton. I thought you're supposed to want to be a priest, Hamilton. So it actually made me step up my game, right? So we're just telling people our story. We're just trying to be faithful to the Lord. And it is attractive to people. They're looking what makes a difference in our life. So it's about perhaps how God has strengthened you through a time of great suffering and pain, or how He has allowed you and not allowed you to forget Him and everything when everything was going well. Maybe how He's allowed you or helped you forgive somebody in the family who you found almost impossible to forgive. That's a big problem. A lot of people struggle with this. It's a real struggle. It keeps families separated for decades. Whatever the case, just be willing to open to telling the story so that others may want God to help them write their own story.